Alright, it's Rogowy here and it's time for another tutorial. Today we are looking at the develop functions within Lightroom. Alright, so I'm going to just open up Lightroom here and I've got a picture ready to go. I have imported this photo already, it's good to go, and I am in the library view. And the library view is great for going through your photos quickly. However, I find anyways on the side here with the quick develop, it's very limited. You can make some quick adjustments, but as far as really advanced edits, you're not going to have much control here. If you want to make adjustments to a photo and you want it to really change, you want to add some global edits, what you need to do is you need to go to the Develop tab. So we're going to click the Develop tab and I'm going to explain some of the options in there. Give it a second to load and here we go. Alright, so in this particular image, I want to edit it a little bit. I find it's dark here and the sky's a little too light as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to develop the picture. All right, and develop is basically a word that means editing your photo. So along the side here, I'm going to explain each of these options. We're going to take a look and I'm going to show you how to use them. Starting with the first one, we're going to use the crop tool, and you'll see that the crop tool shows up right here. It's the marching ants around the rule of thirds. Click that and we have some options here when we decide to crop. We can change the aspect ratio by changing the crop of our photo. I like to always turn it on so that our aspect ratio stays the same. And I'm going to just crop a little out from the side there where I think it's a bit too dark, just so this is nice and evenly framed around the edges. Alright, we can also adjust the angle that this was taken at. So I think my horizon was a little off. So I'm going to adjust that as well. Once we're happy with the adjustments that we make, hit return or enter, and it will now crop to the new size. We'll go through these next ones in a second here, but the next thing you probably want to adjust with your pictures is the white balance. Alright, as we know, the white balance is going to adjust the overall color temperature for the colors within the image. On a shot like this that was taken outside, we could possibly go with an automatic white balance, which you can see here under white balance as shot. Or we can set one of the presets that is built in. So we got auto, daylight, cloudy, which is more of what the scene actually was. We got shade, tungsten, which will make a very blue picture. We got fluorescent and flash. We also have custom, and custom is the one that we're going to do here by clicking this eyedropper. You'll notice that this little loop appears that allows us to see what we're picking, and what we want to select is a neutral gray area. And you notice when I do that, it does take on that warmer tint that we were getting with shade. If we go back, you'll see they're very similar. Alright, shade's actually a little warmer. I'm going to keep it like this. Underneath our white balance selector, we have temperature and tint. Temperature is giving us the temperature of the whites in the photo that we just adjusted with the eyedropper, and this number is showing in kelvins. If we pull this to the left, we're going to create a cooler image. If we pull this to the right, we're going to create a warmer image. In this case, if I leave it close to where I set it, maybe a little bit of an adjustment, it's going to be pretty close to what I set with the eyedropper. The next one is exposure, and you'll notice what it is adjusting for in the histogram. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. So far we've adjusted our white balance. You'll notice that the exposure is the central part of our histogram that we're adjusting. It is how bright or how dark the photo was taken, and it tries to, I guess, change or allow us to change our shutter speed after the fact so that we can lighten or darken this scene a little bit. And you'll notice how our histogram changes as we make those adjustments. Our contrast is the contrast between the dark and light areas of the photograph. You'll notice that they become more pronounced or less pronounced, and actually they create a very flat look if you keep it too low. So we do want some contrast. You'll notice for our highlights, we are adjusting for the bright areas of the scene, the right-hand side of the histogram. I'm going to have a whole tutorial on what histograms, how histograms work, but you can see what we're doing as we adjust this. So we're going to adjust our highlights. We don't want the sky completely blown out, so you can see that we can pull back and bring back some of that detail in the sky. All right, so we don't want it completely white. Our shadows does the opposite. You'll see that it affects this portion of the histogram. And what it allows us to do is bring back some detail in the dark areas of our scene. Remember, you're always trying to not have any areas that are completely underexposed or completely overexposed. You want to always have detail within your entire scene. The whites affects the very far end of our histogram. The whitest of the whites, basically. And it allows us to adjust just those very bright areas. So in this case, it's the sky that it lets us tweak. And we can stretch out if we wanted to. We can stretch out our histogram right close to the end. We don't want it to touch the end because then it's completely blown out. Same with our black. It's the very, very darkest parts of the photo. It basically lets us set our black point, just like the other one let us set our white point. So we're going to pull that off the edge a tiny bit to just create a nice even tone throughout our entire histogram. Key thing here, important thing, is that you don't let them go off the edges too much because you will run into some problems there with loss of detail. The next slider is the clarity slider, and the clarity slider allows us to add some punch to the image. I think it actually was called punch in former versions of Camera Raw. But what this lets you do is it adds you some sharpening to the images. It allows some of those details that otherwise might be lost to return to our picture. And you can see if I really crank it, I get a very painting-like, almost HDR type look. If I go the other way, I get a very soft, almost dreamy type of a look. And so I am going to bring it up a little bit. I always like photos that are a little more punchy. Vibrance, how vibrant our colors are within the scene. So how rich are our colors? So you'll see when you bring that up, when you bring up that vibrance, you do get, if I really crank it, wow, it goes way too much. If I bring it right down, it ends up being grayscale. So we do want some vibrance in our colors, depending on the scene. In this case, we do definitely want. Saturation is the saturation of each single pixel, so how much color each pixel contains. So you can see that this has a much more more brighter effect than vibrance. So if I crank that, same deal, it becomes very, very rich. And if I bring that down, I end up with grayscale. So what I am going to do is I'm going to bring it up a little bit just to give it some more color. Now this was a fall day when this photo was taken, so I really wanted to kind of show the fall leaves and how beautiful the colors were on this day. Tone curve, this allows us to adjust the overall tone within the photo, so our tonal range. Now we can adjust our shadows, our darks, our lights, our highlights. We can tweak each part of it, and we can change the tone of our image to create some interesting effects. You can play around with this and you can get some interesting effects by adjusting your tonal curve, but it does take a bit of practice. You need to know what you're doing. You might get lucky just by playing with it, but you should experiment a bit here. You can also adjust your tone down here by tweaking, in this case, just the highlights, just the light areas, the darks, and the shadows to adjust the range, the tonal curve within the entire image. All right, so those are the first two. They are very useful. All right, the first one especially is the same as what you'll find in Camera Raw. The next one is HSL, color, black and white. We're going to come back to that one. Split toning. If you've ever done split toning before, you can get some really neat effects by changing the color values in the highlights and the shadows. So if I wanted to, for example, have more red in the highlights, there we go. Now let's say I wanted to make it more of a dramatic type of a sky. So I'm going for a very kind of yellowy or pinky sort of a look, like a sunset. Can do the same with the shadows. All right, and this is going to look horrible. So, you know, I'm going to try to find kind of an interesting balance here. And it does take a little bit of experimentation. And then what you can do with the balance slider is you can kind of change which color has more, I guess, more prominence in this picture. So you can go more towards the blue that I picked or more towards the pink. Again, these are just effects that you can add to your image to create an interesting look. If you want to reset these, set it back to gray, and that effect will disappear. Or set the saturation to 0, that works too. All right, so that's split toning. Detail gives us the option of sharpening our image and also allows us to reduce the noise within our image. You'll notice here that this photo was taken at ISO 400, so there's not a whole heck of a lot of noise. We'll look at that in a second. The sharpening, if we increase this, you'll see that those details pop a little more in the trees and in the leaves and all the rest of it. You don't want to go too much though, because then it starts to look really bad, really fake. Now I find that this single view is not enough for me to see what this little window is doing. So what I do is I go down into the bottom left corner and I click the second window or the second view button, and I click and hold and I turn on the loop. The loop is a second display, and you can put this on a second extended display if you have one, that allows us to see either portions of the picture or it allows us to follow the mouse to see how it looks. I always set this 1:1 so that I can see what the details or what the image is going to look like when it prints out. Because ultimately that's the most important, how it looks when it's printed out or when you use it for what it's intended for. So I'm going to find a place where I have some detail. As you can see, I got some leaves here and I got the background. This is a good place to kind of check. And as I adjust my sharpening amount, you'll see it changing in my loop secondary display. Like I said, this is handy because in this window, it's a lot smaller. And in this sharpening window, we only have this tiny little window to see what it's doing. So I find that this display here, and you can change the size of it, allows you to see a bigger portion of the picture and see if that is going to work for you. Under noise reduction, you'll see that if I turn this off completely on the color values, it doesn't change much because it was taken at ISO 400. So you'll notice that Lightroom will automatically set this to about 22, and that will remove the color noise. You notice that there's two types of noise. There's color noise and there's luminance noise. Color noise is when you look at your photo and you see tons of little blocks of color in your photo due to the high ISO. Luminance noise is when you've got this sort of sandy look over your image where you have this dark and light blockiness that we can kind of see in this image. So if I increase luminance, some of that should disappear. All right, I don't know if you can tell on the video, but it did definitely reduce it. I can go a little more. Now you got to be careful with noise reduction because the more you go, the more detail you're sacrificing. And it actually can start to look almost like a painting. So you'll notice in the trees here, they almost look like painterly. If I reduce that all the way, you'll see that they look a little more real as far as trees go. So it's up to you how much you decide to use that. It is very handy to have. One thing I forgot to mention that I think is very important is that some people like to have their display split. So in this case, I'm looking at a single image, I'm making adjustments on a single image, but I can split my display. I can go down to where it has this Y next to another Y, and I can look at my before and after, left and right, and I can see where I started, and I can see where I'm at to see if I've made improvements or if it actually looks worse than what I started with. I can also swap the two so that I can have the after on the left and the before on the right. Okay, and I can also change the orientation. I can put the before on top, the after on the bottom. It all depends on my screen size, my monitor that I'm working on, and what I'm comfortable with looking at. For now, I'm going to stick with the single view. I like to see as much of the photo as I can. This secondary display can be a little annoying if you're working on a small screen, if you don't have an extended display. I usually keep it off to the side here, and I do find it handy to check back, especially when I'm doing my sharpening. Next, lens corrections. Now here's an important one. You'll notice in this particular photo that this tree kind of curves around the edge of the frame. Now, sometimes you'll hear people say that they look fat in photos. And to be honest, there is some truth to that. The curvature of your lens when you take the shot causes areas of the photo to actually curve. Now in this case I was using a fisheye lens, so the curvature is very noticeable. In most cases though, it's very, very slight. So in order to correct this, we go to lens corrections and we set up a profile. Now, before you worry that you're going to have to remember what lens you're using and what camera you're using, by turning this on, most times that information is stored within the metadata of the photo. Okay, so I can set my camera to Canon. If I do remember that I was, in this case, using an 8-15, which it looks like might not be included. Ooh, not good. I am going to change that. I gotta look for my lens. Okay, it was an EF. Ooh, I don't even know if that one's listed here, unfortunately. So in this case, my lens is not listed. All right, I could experiment with other ones and try to get ones to look correct. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the correction. And I'm going to actually manually correct my image. And the way we're going to do this is through distortion. Now, the distortion slider allows you to distort the picture until things look correct. Now, you'll notice what happens is you get this edge, this ugly edge on the outside of your picture that doesn't look very good. And that's because what we're doing is uncurling the image. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to straighten out that tree a bit, and then I'm going to go back to my crop tool, and I'm actually going to crop out that ugly curved edge. Now in this case I was using a Mark III, so I do have a lot of detail in this photo, so I can sacrifice a little bit of it without a huge change to my image. But you can see what that's done is it has reduced the curvature of that tree by quite a bit, and the photo hasn't changed too dramatically. So that's through distortion. All right, lens correction is great, especially if it picks up your camera automatically. It will take out the distortion really, really nicely. I'm not going to go into the advanced ones. Like I said, if it doesn't pick up your camera, you can go to manual and do it yourself. Next one is effects. All right, I'm going to bring this up so you can kind of see what one of them does. We're going to start with vignetting, and I set this to highlight priority. We could do a different priority if we want, but highlight priority will give us a nice vignette. If I slide this to the left, you'll see that the edges become darker. If I slide this to the right, the edges become lighter, and we get some weird effect happening there with the this is called chromatic aberration. I don't like that, so I would maybe darken it a bit. In this case, it kind of has a natural vignette because of the framing that I did here. The next slider is grain. Okay, sorry, I did kind of skip these. This allows you to change the size of the vignette, the shape of the vignette, the midpoint of the vignette. It allows us to tweak how that vignette looks, and so we can adjust the shape of the vignette in our image. The next one down here is grain. I have not yet found a real good use for this, but if I crank it, I could purposely make my photo look really grainy, as if it was shot with a really high ISO. I always keep this low. I always keep it off because I want my photo to look as clean as possible. Camera calibration. Now, this generally is fine if you leave it with the profile that it's set to. However, you will find sometimes that when you're using a point and shoot or a different camera, they will have different profiles used. Now, if you like the profile that you're getting out of your other cameras, you can use the profile here by choosing faithful, landscape, neutral, portrait, and standard. These are the same profiles you'll see within your camera when you set your color profile. We generally use faithful so that we can do all the adjustments ourselves, but you can go through these and you can see how each one will affect your final image. All right, I'll just do that really quickly here. So you could actually go through this and see that, okay, maybe landscape, I like that, or maybe I like faithful, it's better than what I was using. You can quickly go through and see how it's going to change the color. Actually, in this case, landscape is really nice. It really makes the colors punchy. I might have to go back to my basic settings up at the top after I've done all these. Okay, so that was all the adjustments there. And I am finding that the shadows in this photo are way too dark. So I do want to bring that up a little bit more. I don't like the darkness of this shadow. All right, a couple more adjustments here that we'll go through quickly. I'll save spot removal for a second. Red eye, pretty straightforward. If you have somebody who has red eye in the photo, you can click and remove it. Graduated filter, basically the same as a graduated filter that you'd put on your lens, like an ND or a polarized filter. Okay, there's two. This is your polarized filter. This is a graduated filter. So if I want the sky, for example, darker than the rest of the photo, I can adjust by creating a gradient and having an overall gradient in my image. That would really change the light. I'm going to take that out. I don't like that. Graduated filter, darkening from the edges, kind of to create a vignette. Adjustment layer, we can talk about that later. This is if you want to adjust certain parts of the picture. Now, spot removal, this is kind of handy. If you have dust on your sensor, let's pretend, actually for a moment here, that down here, this little drop in the water is some dust. Okay, what I can do here, really nice and quickly, is I can zoom in and click on that little dust spot. Now I have two options. I have clone and I have heal. Heal is going to allow me to compare the pixels near that spot to fill it in and to make it look natural. Clone is simply going to take a copy of the part that I click or move around here to replace the water that was there with whatever's in the circle. All right, so I forgot to mention one thing that's important here. Up at the top here, at the top of your navigator, you have fit, fill, 1:1, 3:1. Fill just simply fills the width of the picture with what you're viewing. Fit fills the entire picture in your scene. 1:1 goes to 100% and allows you to zoom in and look around your picture very quickly, very easily. 3:1, obviously it's really zoomed in and you can get right in there and see all the little details. Okay, if I want to see what I just adjusted, I can always go back to the spot tool and it says, okay, this is what you referenced and here's how it here's what it replaced. Okay, I could also go to clone. You can see it's not as natural. Heal is great because it actually compares the area. All right, so let's say it was this little spot I'm trying to remove. I can just put that right on there. It's referencing here, placing it there, blending it nicely because it's on heal, and my photo looks great. I can hit done and it's gone. Now, I don't have any dust on this particular lens. It's actually really clean camera, so I don't see any dust spots, but that's a really handy feature for quick edits there. Anyways, once I'm all done, and again, I'm not going to talk too much about histogram. Once I'm good with these adjustments, then I usually go to this, HSL, color and black and white. In this case, because it is a color image, we're going to go to HSL, which stands for hue, saturation, and luminance. And what I like about this is I can tweak certain colors within the photo. For those of you who use Photoshop, this is very similar to selective color. So you can adjust your reds, for example, and you'll see there's not very much reds in this picture. Oranges, there they are. You see those trees really changing in the leaves there. And I'm assuming yellow is going to be a big adjustment as well. Yeah, definitely. In those trees. Greens, if I think my greens are too much, I can pull them back or increase them, whatever I think looks good. Aqua, I don't see much of an adjustment there. I thought maybe the water would get a little bit affected. Blues should affect the sky and the water. Yes, definitely. And so you can see those adjustments are happening there. Purple and magenta, I probably don't have very much of those in this photo. A little bit in the sky for purple. Same with magenta, just a little touch. All right, so you can see that's what HSL does. It allows us to do the hue, saturation, and luminance, and I can do each one separately. Or I can do color, which is very similar here. By clicking the color I want to adjust, I can do the hue, saturation, luminance all within these 3 sliders. Now before I proceed, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a snapshot. And what a snapshot lets me do is it lets me keep the photo that I'm working on exactly as it is. So I'm going to go to the plus here. I'm going to create a snapshot. So right now this is stored exactly as it is if I want to come back to it. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm going to black and white. If I click black and white, now I can adjust each color within there and control how it goes to black and white. All right, so I'm tweaking each color and I'm creating a black and white image. I don't want this particular image in black and white. I prefer it in color. So what I'm going to do is go back to my snapshot, click it, and go back to where I was before. One other thing I want to mention, I'll probably have a separate tutorial at some point for this as well. I'm going to talk a little bit about presets because it is definitely part of developing. Sometimes when people start in Lightroom and they're going for a certain look, especially black and white, you can actually skip some of this developing tools that are on the right hand side, some of these editing tools. And you can actually go over to the left side where there's presets. And presets allows you to try different filters and different settings that Lightroom has already created. So let me show you an example. Let's say I go to the black and white toned presets. Now I skipped a bunch here. There's tons. But let's look through these. Antique, antique light, cream tone. As you can see, I can just click through these and get a bunch of different looks really, really quick. Now these are great, but as with anything automatic, you're definitely going to want to go back and tweak your settings after it's done these automatic settings for you. So you could start with this and then, bring back some detail and still tweak all of your settings here. It's just a starting point. Remember your snapshot, you can always go back and check it. Now, okay, I'm not 100% happy with this right now, but I'm going to keep it as is. If I go to my before and after, you can see that the starting photo was pretty dull. Maybe I went a little too far with my saturation and my this shadows definitely need to be tweaked a bit here. But you can see that I have a photo that now has a lot more punch and a lot more impact than the original that looks actually now very, very boring and lifeless. All right, so that is the end of this particular tutorial. Hopefully that helps you when you're developing your pictures. I don't know if there's anything I missed. Please comment if I did. Hopefully that helps you get started with your pictures in Lightroom. Till next time, take care.